Hello Year 7. This is Mrs. Slattery and this is your assessment task number 1 for 2018. Your topic is It's All About Writing. It is an in-class writing task and it is due in Term 1, Week 8. You will receive 25 marks for this task and the weighting is 25%. It is a creative writing assessment. The rubric is very important. This is what you will be marked on. There are 4 criteria and you will be marked on how well you, firstly, can compose a story that expresses how a reflection can provide insight, distract, delight, harm, or confuse us. Boys, to do this, you are provided with a stimulus sheet on the next page, which I will describe to you in detail. The second criteria is you will be marked on how well you demonstrate an effective narrative structure that explores your idea with coherence and clarity. For your story to be coherent, you should think about the beginning and the ending, and they should work together to make a complete whole that communicates your imaginative response to the stimulus. Within that, there will be clarity so that your audience or responder understands what it is you're trying to say and your meaning. The third criteria, boys, is you will be marked on how well you correctly use language forms and features that are appropriate for a short story. Some examples of what you might consider in this section are: what kind of narrator will you have? Will you use first person, second person, or third person? Who is your narrator? What tone do they possess? What language can you use to indicate time and place and the setting? Can you use dialogue? These are all things that you should consider. The fourth criteria, boys, is you will be marked on how well you use correct spelling, punctuation, sentence structure, and grammar. Within this criteria, I'm looking at your entire story and how you extend your language choice to include words that might be difficult. And we would be looking to see that you spell those words correctly. You would use punctuation correctly to enhance clarity and create meaning for the text. Your sentence structure should show that you have an ability to manipulate both simple and complex sentences to create meaning. With your grammar, I am looking for your ability to use language in a way that you can make a complete sentence that makes meaning both succinctly and deeply. Moving on to your stimulus, boys. The theme for your stimulus is reflections. If you look closely at the stimulus, I will read the first big blue box. We live in a world where reflections are everywhere. Reflections can distract, delight, harm, or confuse us. People are obsessed by their image and creating their identity. Are we missing out on opportunities because of our self-obsession? Your task is to write a story about when a reflection has or has not caused harm to an object, person, or event. Use one of the pieces of stimulus as a starting point or source of idea for your story. Limit your story to one event and one time frame. Give your story a title. Boys, this is your task. Some tips on how to best achieve this short story is in the smaller box beneath, and I will read those 5 dot points now for you. You should consider who, what are your characters, and where are they, and what's happening. Dot point 2, how can you build tension in each paragraph? How can you make the climax or surprise or enlighten the reader? How can you resolve the character's situation or problem? Remember that you don't always have to resolve it. And your word limit is 500 words, and you must stick to this word limit. Boys, you'll notice there's 10 stimuli on this page, and that doesn't include the big image that saturates the entire page in the background, which is a rainbow, which is a reflection, and that rainbow refraction of light is reflected in the water. But if we move to the top of the page, to the lady with a phone, she's taking what we call a selfie, an image of herself. We know that this is commonplace, and we see this happen often. Mobile phone means that we all have access to taking photos not only of others but of ourselves. If we move in a clockwise direction, the second stimuli is a series of 4 social media icons, and they are Facebook, Instagram, Twitter and YouTube. You'll know many more, but we know that social media is a big part of our life, of a lot of people's lives, and somehow we use that as a way to reflect our life and put that reflection of our life out into the world. Sometimes we use it to reflect our thoughts and our feelings. The picture below that, boys, is of a dog looking into a river. This is a picture taken from a fable, Aesop's fable, about a dog that has a bone and is on his way home to eat it. And greedily he sees another dog, which is in fact his reflection in the river, that appears to have a bigger bone than him. In his haste to get the other dog's bone, as soon as he barks, his bone drops in the river. He's actually quite confused by this reflection he sees. When we go to the bottom, the fourth stimuli, the pretty lady, or the rather beautiful young lady who's looking at a reflection of herself in a mirror, and her reflection appears to be distorted. It appears quite negative, and the vision she sees of herself is not an accurate portrayal of who she is. When we go to the fifth stimulus, you'll see that it is a quote by someone by the name of Thomas Paine. And the quote is, "The real man smiles in trouble, gathers strength from distress, and grows brave by reflection." This is another perspective on reflection, an abstract idea that sometimes reflection is not something we see, but it's something we do when we think back on ideas or situations and we learn from them. The stimuli next to that is of a man who is a bodybuilder and obviously puts a great deal of effort into his image. His pose or stance is one of strength. You might consider how he sees himself and how his body is a reflection of his hard work. The image above that, boys, is one of the sun. It's a scientific image, and two of the most important features of that is the reflection of the sun's light. You'll notice that light is only about 2% of light is reflected from the Earth's surface. About 23% of the light is reflected by clouds, and the rest of it is scattered by air or absorbed into the surface of the Earth or in clouds and gases and water vapor. If we move on here, this bottom left image of a man staring into his reflection in a river is in fact an image of a famous mythological story called Narcissus, and he is a man who fell in love with his reflection. He fell in love with the reflection of himself. If you notice in this image, he's so absorbed with an image of himself that he doesn't actually notice there is a lady standing behind him, and you can see her reflection beside him in the river. We move above that to a picture of a duck who sees a reflection, a rather positive reflection of himself, bigger, better looking swan. Sometimes the image that we look in is not distorted like the lady in the bottom right corner in a negative way, but distorted in a positive way. We see ourselves as being better sometimes than what we are. And just above that, boys, is the quote, "You don't deserve a point of view if the only thing you see is you." This really points to the idea of empathy and our ability to reflect on other people's experience or how other people might be feeling. All these things should be taken into consideration, and you can choose any one of those as a starting point for your own story. Remember to be imaginative and creative in the way that you approach it. Okay, boys, this leads us to the dot points that appear underneath your stimulus. What you need to do is really think about your personal experience in the world and reflect on that to give your story authenticity. I'd like you to think about who are the best characters that would tell your story and utilise them perhaps as a narrator or as characters in it. Remember, it's a short story, so your time frame that your story occurs in should be quite limited. You could have a 10-minute story that's very effective. You should have fewer characters as well. For you to be able to be sound, you would need to use your narrative structure. It's very clearly shown here, 1 to 6, and explained for you. I will just say the structure and you can read what each one means. You need an orientation, a complication, a series of events, at least 3, a climax, a falling action, and a resolution. Boys, you will have 2 lessons in week 6 where you will be allowed to work on your short stories in class with your teacher and receive feedback. These lessons will be at your class teacher's discretion. When we come to the marking criteria, to get into an A range, you would obviously need to use your narrative structure. You would need to have detail, and you would need to be innovative in the way that you think about the theme reflection. I would expect, boys, that you would challenge yourself to use difficult words and to spell them correctly. You should show an ability to manipulate your sentence structure and your grammar to create deeper meaning. Primarily, you would be innovative and sophisticated in your use of language. To hit the B range again, you would need to be detailed, and you would need to be effective in the way that you use your narrative structure, and you would need to use the idea of reflection in a way that is interesting. It may not be innovative, but it might be interesting. You would demonstrate a highly developed use of language in terms of using more difficult language and spelling it correctly. You would control your punctuation again and your sentence structure and manipulate them and your grammar to create meaning. When we get to the C range, boys, you would compose a story that uses the theme of reflection, and you would be hopefully interesting in the way that you use it and creative, but it might be a bit more cliched or stereotypical. It might include ideas that I would expect. You would have a clear narrative structure, and you would demonstrate a mix of complex and simple sentences to make meaning, and you would have some control of your spelling. There might be a few more errors than that would appear in A and B, but you might try and use harder or more difficult words appropriately to make meaning. Boys, to hit the D range, you may compose a story that might not use the idea or theme of reflection very well. You might demonstrate some elements of the narrative structure, probably not all in this range. You would demonstrate a basic use of language, and you would not be using very difficult language, and you may not be controlling your spelling, your punctuation, or your grammar and sentence structure. There might be times where your story will not be coherent or have clarity. To hit the E range, your story would be very short. You would have a limited reference to reflection, and you would have an elementary understanding of the narrative structure, possibly missing sections of it. There would be basic use of your language, elementary use of your language, and your sentences may not make sense, and you may use simple words.